Hello, everybody. A very warm good afternoon to everybody. Good evening to everybody. It's a festive season that we are at now, and we are towards the end of a year, which has been troublesome, which has been hard, and we have fought through it. We are all hoping that 2021 would be a better year for all of us in all aspects. Today, here we are going to have a talk by Professor Rezavi. It is a part of a lecture series, a joint lecture series that we are having between Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, ASHA, and Ganga Jamuni. In this lecture series, as you all must be familiar, we have 2 lectures per week. On Fridays, we have lectures which deal with sources of Indian history mostly. And on Sundays, we talk about certain topics which talk about the shared culture that we have had, the syncretic culture that we have had. And today's lecture is a part of that aspect of the lecture series that we have. Unfortunately, I'm sure that you people were familiar. You people knew that today Dr. Catherine Schofield was supposed to speak to you. She was supposed to speak to you on a very interesting topic, a topic which interests the masses, which interests the historians, which interests the academics alike. And the topic was how Mughals were perceived by the Indian film industry. I think we all are familiar with the popular culture that there is. We have all seen Mughal-e-Azam, we've all seen Jodha Akbar, and we know that there is a particular narrative that has been perpetuated by Bollywood regarding Mughals. So that was a very interesting topic. We don't need to be disheartened. We will have Dr. Catherine Schofield with us in a few weeks. Today, unfortunately, she was unwell. She had some health issues, and that is why she couldn't be with us. In her stead, we have Professor Ali Nadeem Rezavi. He needs no introduction. I think all the viewers who have been following these lecture series would be familiar with Professor Rezavi. He has been hosting these lectures, and today he is going to talk to us about a very intriguing topic, another very intriguing topic, and that is the theme of the lecture is, was Akbar literate? And this is a question that historians and academicians have been grappling with for a long time. They have done researches. For example, Ellen Smart has put up his views regarding this particular topic, and he has argued that it was probably dyslexia that Akbar had, which became known to most of the people through Amir Khan's starrer Tare Zameen Par. And it was because of this dyslexia that Akbar could not read and write, and that is why he could not be literate. So what was this? What is this idea behind Akbar being illiterate? What is this narrative? And we know that from time immemorial, the idea of illiteracy being associated with great figures, with great thinkers, or with great religious figures in that sense is something that somehow adds to their legitimacy, somehow adds to their worth, somehow adds to their the greatness that they that they have, that they exhibit. So we are going to dwell on these issues. I have already told you people how Professor Rezavi doesn't need any introduction, and he is a teacher to us. He has been my teacher through the masters, and he has also taught Akbar to a number of batches of Masters of History. So I now, not taking much of the time, I now hand over the virtual podium to Professor Rezavi. Over to you, Professor Rezavi.
Thank you, Lubna Irfan. As Lubna said that today we were expecting Catherine Schofield once again, who was supposed to talk to us about the Mughals, music, and the movies. But unfortunately, uh, yesterday evening, she informed that uh, she had certain health issues due to which it would not be possible for her to be with us today evening. I promised her, and I'm promising all of you, that very soon we would be having Dr. Scofield amongst us. And that is a topic which shall be dealt in this series, if a little delayed. Today, as we has been just announced, that we are going to talk about a topic which concerns with Akbar and his deficiency in the three R's: reading, writing, etc. Uh, there are a number of theories which have been given. Generally, it is said that amongst all the Mughals, Akbar was the person who was unlettered, and that is why most of the things were read out to him, and he could not. I mean, we know that Babur left an account, Jahangir left an account, but not Akbar. Babur and Jahangir are considered as two intellectually inclined rulers who also had exceptionally developed literary tastes. Both are credited to have penned their autobiographies, while Babur was also an accomplished poet to boot. Not only these two, Aurangzeb too is supposed to have been a scholar, and many letters written by him survive. Humayun too was a poet, cultivated scholars, and maintained a well-stocked library. His sister was a scholar of Persian and an author of a book. As far as Shah Jahan is concerned, again we know that he patronized, not only patronized scholars, but was also a well-versed man. The only Mughal emperor about whom there is almost a consensus that he was unlettered is the greatest of them all, Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. Most historians and scholars hold that Akbar could never read and write. And that is why during his reign, as I said, a large number of texts were illustrated so that he may be able to visualize what was being written. Incidentally, while we say this, we forget that this was a tradition among the Timurids, and Akbar was not the first of the Timurids who was getting the manuscripts illustrated. We know that even Amir Taimur, a large number of manuscripts had been illustrated during his period, and he was not unlettered. We are also told that as Akbar could not read, texts were orally communicated to him as he intently listened. But we also know the fact that once again, this was a usual common practice. In fact, almost all the Mughal emperors had manuscripts and texts read out to them. We know that even a person like Jahangir, who is credited to have written Tuzuk-e Jahangiri, also used to, have people who would read out not only the documents and letters, but also the manuscripts. So, in other words, here in this hour or so, we would try to revisit this myth and demonstrate through primary source material and certain writings which were done by contemporary historians and the later historians, that Akbar, contrary to popular belief, was able to read and write. Further, His stress on rational science and intellect led not only subjects like arithmetic being included in curriculum, but even tabulations being included in his official history being written on his orders by Abul Fazl. In fact, the tabulations which have been incorporated by Abul Fazl in his Akbarnama, which is now known as Ain Akbari, is in fact one of the remarkable feats of Akbar himself. Akbar's policies, in fact, reflect his deep knowledge of contemporary philosophies, which were too complex for an illiterate to understand. If Akbar was literate, as I am alluding, then why did he pretend that he was unlettered? Why this type of myth was allowed to be developed and popularized? This is yet another major question in which we would be delving into and trying to find an answer. Babur, the founder of the Mughal dynasty, was a literateur, a remarkable prose writer, and a poet. His memoir, the Baburnama, is an autobiography which is one of its kind. He is also said to have patronized a host of learned men. Humayun too was a scholar with a cultivated taste for literature, art, and science, especially mathematics, geography, and astronomy. In his administration, if one believes Juan the Mir, the learned classes, the literati, and the scientists, that is Ahl Saadat, were placed at the very top. Now let us deal with this general belief. Akbar, as far as Akbar was concerned, he could neither read or write. We know that Akbar had books read out to him on a daily basis. Manuscripts in large numbers were illustrated. And the reason which, in fact, Abul Fazl has given for it, I read out one, passage from Akbarnama in the volume 2. Abul Fazl says, and I quote him, "One day at a private party of friends, His Majesty, who had conferred on several the pleasure of drawing near him, remarked, 'There are many that hate painting, but such men I dislike. It appears to me as if a painter had quite peculiar means of recognizing God. For a painter, in sketching anything that has life, is devising its limbs one after the other, must come to feel that he cannot bestow individuality upon his work, and be thus forced to think of God, the giver of life, and will thus increase in knowledge," unquote. From a very early age, Akbar was schooled by Humayun, who appointed a number of tutors, that is ataliq, one after the other. Two of them were quite famous. Khwaja Jalaluddin Mahmud Bujuk, who had been in the service of Mirza Askari and had subsequently joined Humayun, and all of us know about Bairam Khan Khane Khanan. The first teacher, however, when Akbar was 5 years of age, was Mulla Zada Husamuddin Ibrahim. But on the very first day itself, it is said that Akbar hid and did not attend his class. Later, he was dismissed on the charge that he was wasting time in pigeon flying. Bayazid Bayat, one of the contemporary authors of Akbar's period, too narrates a story of 1551, which he had heard from Akbar's own lips in 1571-72, as to how once Akbar took the help of Munim Khan to take a day's leave from the maktab of Husamuddin which was not liked by Humayun, who asked him not to repeat this mistake again. And this has been reported by Bayazid Bayad in his Tazkirah Humayun wa Akbar. Subsequent to him, Maulana Bayazid had been appointed. Later on, another tutor who was appointed was Maulana Abdul Qadir. Yet another tutor of Akbar was Mir Abdul Latif, who was appointed when Akbar was in his teens. But in spite of these attempts at schooling, it is said that Akbar remained unlettered. In fact, this fact that Akbar remained unlettered is attested to by two contemporary authorities of that period. In a report filed by Father Montserrat, which has been published in the memoirs of the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1914, Father Montserrat, in this memoir, he writes, and I quote from these memoirs of Asiatic Society of Bengal, Akbar ordered learned men to explain through discourse in his presence religious, philosophical, and historical matters. He had the power of great memory and judgment, the patience of listening to others, and the ability to join in the discussion enthusiastically. He knew about a great many things, and he was constantly learning. Not only did he compensate for, and I stress, for his ignorance of things written, but what is more, he explained difficult things plainly and simply. Although he was totally ignorant of reading and writing, mark it, the words ignorant of reading and writing, no one who did not already know this would think that he was illiterate. This is what Father Montserrat says. Very point blank, that Akbar did not know, he was ignorant of reading and writing. Not only the Jesuit father, but Akbar's own son Jahangir, in his memoirs, also has almost the same words to say about Akbar. And I quote Jahangir from his Tuzuk. My father always associated with the learned of every creed and religion, especially with pundits and learned of India. Although he was, and he uses the term ummi, and illiterate. So much became clear to him through constant intercourse with the learned and wise in his conversation with them, that no one knew that he knew him to be an illiterate. And he was so acquainted with the niceties of verse and prose compositions that his deficiency was not thought of. Mark these words of Jahangir, where Jahangir has used the term ummi for his father. The same word had occurred in Muslim history and theology for a very sacred personality of Islam. We will come to that later on. According to Ellen Smart, he is one of those who took up to write on this topic, and he wrote exactly on this very topic. I have taken the title of today's talk based on the article with Ellen Smart had written, Akbar the Illiterate Genius, which was published in 1981 in a journal which is brought out from Banaras Kala Darshan. And according to him, in this particular article, Smart says that Akbar was a dyslex. Dyslexia is a neurological disturbance which includes a specific syndrome involving difficulty in learning the conversational meaning of verbal symbols and inability to associate the sound with symbol in appropriate fashion. We have evidence of Abul Fazl, dated 1556, that one day when Akbar was under the tutelage of Mir Sayyid Ali and Khwaja Abdul Samad, Akbar drew with his pencil a sketch of a person with all his limbs separated. When asked, Akbar explained that it was Hemu. But then this was an incident which happened before Hemu had actually been slain. Smart takes it to be a typical example of dyslexia. But as I said, that Akbar reportedly drew the separate limbs at a time when Hemu was yet to be slain. Incidentally, at Fatehpur Sikri, in one of the palaces, the Khwabgah where Akbar is supposed to have rested, uh, there is a painting, a beautiful painting, where there is a deity sitting in between, and all around him, are yeah, persons with their limbs, dissected and thrown randomly all around. It's almost that painting reminds you of what Akbar had drawn in 1556. But if this was so, if Akbar was actually a dyslexic, how could he be trained as a painter? And we know that Akbar was well versed in the art of painting. Now, I would try to lay before you a number of points to argue that probably Akbar was neither unlettered nor uneducated. Let me take the first point. Was it possible for an illiterate to have actually understood or come under the influence of such profound philosophies as those of Ibn al-Arabi or the Ishraqi philosophy of Shahabuddin Makhtul? And there are modern scholars like Irfan Habib who have written, articles on that, and we find that it is not only at a very scratchy level that Akbar had followed what Shahabuddin Makhtul had written or what Ibn al-Arabi was saying. He had in-depth knowledge of both these philosophies. Akbar was not only aware but very familiar to the doctrine of Wahdatul Wujud, which is not a very simple philosophical thing to be understood. The development of Akbar's worldview subsequently to his being deeply influenced by the pantheism of Ibn al-Arabi is identified with the concept which he came up with, the Sulhekul. He also seems to be well aware about the philosophy of the Nirgun Bhakti. In 1595, one finds Akbar emphasizing the absoluteness of divine reality and that one could reach it not by formal prayers but only by cultivating the self and with the help of a perceptor. This philosophy recalls to mind the teachings of Kabir and Nanak, and this was not possible for an illiterate to comprehend. Secondly, this fact is also demonstrated by the new curriculum which was introduced by Akbar as far as his education system was concerned. There is a chapter by Abul Fazl, Aine Amozish, Regulations Regarding Education, which lays out the rules, curriculum, and system of education to be followed in the schools. And I'll try to read out a very important passage which has been included while explaining what was the mode of education which was introduced by Akbar. And I quote, in every country, but especially in Hindustan, boys are kept for years at school, but where they learn the consonants and vowels. A great portion of the life of these students is wasted by making them read many books. His Majesty orders that every schoolboy should first learn to write the letters of the alphabet and also learn to trace their several forms. He ought to learn the shape and the name of each letter, which may be done in 2 days, when the boy should proceed to write the joined letters. They may be practiced for a week, after which the boy should learn some prose and poetry by heart, and then commit to memory some verse in the praise of God or moral sentences, each written separately. Care is to be taken that he learns to understand everything himself, but the teacher may assist him a little. He then ought for some time to do daily practice in writing a hemistiche or verse. And this way, he will soon acquire a current hand. The teacher ought specially to look after 5 things: knowledge of the letters, meaning of words, the hemistiche, and the former lesson. If this method of teaching is adopted, a boy will learn in a month or even in a day what it took others years to understand, so much so that people will get astonished. Every boy ought to read books on morals, that is akhlaq, hisab, arithmetic, the notation peculiar to mathematics, that is siyaq, falahat, agriculture, musahat, menstruation, hindasa, geometry, nujum, astronomy, ramal, physiognomy, tadbir-e-manzil, household matters, the rules of government, that is siyasat-e-madan, tib, medicine, mantiq, logic, ilm-e-tabi'i, physical sciences, and theological sciences, ilm-e-ilahi, as well as tarikh, history, all of which may be gradually acquired. In studying Sanskrit, students ought to learn Vyakran, that is grammar, Nyai, Vedanta, and Patanjal. No one should be allowed to neglect those things which the present time requires. Now, this description of the mode of teaching in the schools, that is madrasas, at least makes it clear that under Akbar, A, education was brought under state purview. B, emphasis was on a method to impart comprehension rather than merely learning by the system of rote. Thirdly, the thrust was on the topic other than religious sciences, with almost all the known branches of sciences being emphasized. And lastly, the teaching of the non-Muslim wards and students was also taken care of. It is not only Badayuni who is reporting this, Abul Fazal who is reporting this. Badayuni also asserts this point when he laments, and I quote Badayuni, reading of Arabic and its learning was looked upon as crime, and fiqh, jurisprudence, and tafsir, that is exegesis of the Quran, hadith, and their study was considered bad and disapproved of. Nujum, astronomy, hikmat, philosophy, tarikh, history, and afsana novels were cultivated and thought necessary. Emphasizing the importance given to the non-religious curriculum and the fact that it was to be taught both to the Muslims and non-Muslims, Badaini at yet another place informs us, and I quote him, in this year, that is 1586, it was ordered that all sections, har qaum, should give up Arabic sciences, ulume Arabiya, and apart from ulume ghariba, that is external sciences like nujum, astronomy, hisab, mathematics, tib, medicine, and falsafa, philosophy, should study nothing else. The date of this was found as Kasate Fazl. Schools appear to have been constructed on imperial orders since the reign of Humayun. He had established a school at Delhi on the river bank in honor of Zainuddin Khafi. Mahamanaga, the foster mother of Akbar, opened a madrasa known as Madrasa Begum, which was also known as Khairul Manazil. It was a residential institution with students residing in the rooms of this double-storied structure. The classes were held in the hall. At Agra, according to Badaini, there was another great college being run in the hospice of the learned scholar Shah Mir. There are numerous references to a madrasa meant for the royal princes and princesses being run inside the imperial palace at Fatehpur Sikri. Montserrat describes it when he mentions that Akbar appointed him to teach the royal wards. Apart from this fact, there is another point which tells us about the type of educated mind which Akbar had. During his period, there was a stress on aql, rationalism, and thus a stress on subjects like arithmetic. Possibly Abul Fazl's Ain-e-Akbari is the first text which deals with statistical data and tabulations. And all this was included on the insistence of Akbar himself. Now, I would come to yet another point, which in fact shows that Akbar was himself a poet of some sort. Arif Kandhari, in his account of 1571, and Lubna, you may please put up that page for us, everyone, to see what Arif Kandhari has written in 1571. At a time when Akbar was marching towards Lahore and stopped at near Batala and Jalandhar for hunt. In fact, Arif Kandhari cites a few verses of a ghazal composed by Akbar. Mark it, Arif Kandhari says that it is a ghazal which was composed by Akbar. Unfortunately, this whole passage is missing from the English translation, which had been done by Dr. Tasneem Ahmad, formerly of the ICHR, Indian Council of Historical Research. Incidentally, this translation has many portions lifted straight from a translation attempted by P. Saran earlier. But let us leave what type of translation of Arif Kandhari has been done by Tasneem Ahmad. Before you, as you can see, are certain of the verses from a ghazal which had been composed by Akbar, which he says, which Arif Kandhari mentions that during his account of 1571. There's a very, short verses. चीते पातशाह काला गिरफ्त, खून दशरा चू लाला गिरफ्त, बाश होशियार ए हरीफ के बाज, साकिए तुंद खू प्याला गिरफ्त, बहर खूं रेजी गुलो लाला, अब्र दामन जे संग जाला गिरफ्त, बुवत शाह रा परी वो शान बिस्यार, दिल बरे दिगर अज बताला गिरफ्त, शाह अकबर बेबी जे लुत्फ अल्लाह, हिंद रा बखते कबाला गिरफ्त. Now, I won't translate the whole of it, but I would just point out that these verses do show that Akbar may have been a poet of some degree, but he was nothing near to what Babur had been. I mean, we also know that Babur was also a poet, and he has left behind a number of his verses in the Babur Nama. So if you compare the verses of Babur, which incidentally originally were in Turkish, later on translated by Abdur Rahim Khan Khanan while he was translating the text of the Babur Nama into Farsi. He also translated them into Farsi, but they are much more mature. They show Babur to be a very literate person. Here, these verses, which have been quoted, cited by Arif Kandari, do point out that yes, Akbar had this much, education, that he could say verses, he could compose verses, but these verses are जिसके कहते हैं कि वो कोई पाए के शेर नहीं है. They are just of an ordinary person, but still they do depict that Akbar too had some sort of a training. After all, when I started with this lecture, I told you that he had a large number of tutors who taught him literature, history, and everything, and that is why he was at least this much, well versed that he could compose his own poetry. Now let us come to another aspect. Lubna, can you now put up the second slide? There are at least two examples of Akbar's handwriting which are extant. A third one also survives, which Robert Skelton thinks might be a specimen of Akbar's writing. The first, which is now before you, is folio 1A of Garrett's Zafarnama. And this has been reproduced by Ellen Smart as well as by Arnold in his Behzad and paintings in the Zafarnama. Both, first of all, T. Arnold published it. Later on, it was published by Ellen Smart. Now, if you pay attention to this page, to the lower left of the central medallion is the letter Alif, beneath which is written Farwardin, the name of the first month of the year in the Ilahi era, instituted by Akbar in 1584. Below that, in another handwriting, is written in Persian, and I read the translation of that. This kalima is in the blessed khat of Arsh Astani, that is Akbar. Mir Jamaluddin Inju presented this copy to His Majesty in the Darul Khilafa, Agra. The same Alif and same Farwardin, the month of the name of the month, but in a smaller script, is found on folio 1A of Gulistan. May we have the third slide, please? Which once belonged to Marquis of Bute. The words are found almost in the same position as in the earlier manuscript. And below it, we find Jahangir's writing. In his hand, Jahangir writes, Dastkhat-e Mubarak Hazrat Shah Baba Akbar Padshah. He attests to the fact that both these words, Alif and Farwardin, have been written by the auspicious hand of my father Akbar. The page contains notes and seals of Shah Jahan, Jahanara, Dara Shikoh, and some others. Let us have the next slide. The writing proposed by Skelton to be that of Akbar is to be found on the first illustration in a manuscript which is known as Tarikh-e-Khandan-e Taimuriya. This painting is before you. Unfortunately, I don't have a colored reproduction of this painting. I tried to get it, but only the black and white version is available. The painting shows Amir Taimur as a boy playing with toys in the company of friends. At the top is written Amir Taimur Shah Sahib-e-Qiran. The painting is by Daswant, who committed suicide in 1584. Robert Skelton believed that the opening words, next one please, Amir Taimur Shah Sahib Qiran, you could see the actual writing which is there. Skelton believes these opening words are written by Akbar himself. An assumption which is quite plausible, because if you look closely, then you would find that there is some similarity, same childishness in the writing as we found in the earlier two words, which had been attested to have been written by Akbar by his son Jahangir himself. All these three specimens display a hesitancy in vertical strokes and a hand which is not very used to writing. So, my contention is that if Akbar could both read and write, howsoever childishly, he could comprehend, but he could comprehend complex philosophical thoughts and display an intellect with a worldview. Why does he himself and Abul Fazl, as well as Jahangir, try to depict him as unlettered? In fact, as we have seen, Jahangir uses the term Ummi for his father. Let us remember that Abul Fazl has tried to gloss over all the defects of Emperor Akbar. All of us know that when Akbar fainted, he had, epilepsy, a bout of epilepsy during one of the hunts. Abul Fazl says that it was a divine intervention. Just like the Prophet would faint at a time when the Wahi was being brought to him, Abul Fazl says that when Akbar was also in divine communion, after all, Akbar was a divine king, he would commune with God, and when he was in communion, he would, in fact, look as if he had fainted. And this is not the only time. At each and every occasion, Abul Fazl has one, gloss or the other to hide any of the defects of His Majesty. So why is he so open? Why does he take pride in calling Akbar unlettered? Why? Because howsoever childishly, when Akbar did write, when Akbar could paint, when Akbar could understand the complex philosophies, when Akbar could compose verses, howsoever badly, why does Abul Fazl of all the people calls him an ummi? Jahangir too uses the same term ummi for his father. Now, what is ummi? What is the meaning of ummi? It doesn't simply mean unlettered. The term ummi has a different connotation in the world of Islam. In the Muslim world, the term ummi is generally used for the Prophet. In fact, the Muslims take pride that their Prophet was an ummi. In that context, it stands for, the word ummi stands for a person who did not acquire education from any human being. The Prophet was an ummi as he had no teacher except God. Akbar and possibly Abul Fazl probably wanted to place himself in that very position. Remember that Abul Fazl has a passage where he tries to draw a parallel between a divine king, a divine birth, and Akbar. He narrates the whole incident of Al-Anqa just to point out that, just like Mary, who conceived without the intervention of a man, the son of a god, in the same fashion, the lineage of the Mughals tracing from Changiz and Timur had that seed within itself. All effort is made by Abul Fazl in the Akbarnama to posit Akbar as a divinely inspired being. As I said, he descended from the immaculate conception of Al-Anqa, and in spite of a number of tutors who were appointed for him, he actually learned from none but God. Before 1578, he is shown to have had mystical experiences and psychological imbalances. He would go into a trance and mutter in incomprehensible words, and Abul Fazl would say he was in communion with God. Just like the Prophet who would go into a trance when Gabriel would visit him with a word of God. It is noteworthy that no such communion is reported after 1578. In 1579, with the failure of Mazar, through which Akbar tried to take up a divine position, Akbar started pursuing the policy of Sulh-e-Kul. The discussions in the Ibadat Khana from 1575 to 77 and then from 77 to 79 convinced him of the futility of following the religions. From 1580-81, as Father Montserrat claimed, by claiming all religions to be true, Akbar was in fact negating all religions. Now he had no need to pose like a prophet. It was a triumph of rationalism. and thus now no mystical experiences are reported at all. By 1590s, Akbar appears to have abandoned all pretexts of being unlettered as well. And the crucial evidence for this comes from an account of Faizi Sarhindi. Ilahadat Faizi Sarhindi, in his Akbarnama, which is a manuscript at the British Library, narrates that one late night on 18th June 1590, which was Shab-e Miraj, he was called by the emperor, where he, in the presence of Naqib Khan, showed Akbar the manuscript of the history of Jauhar Aftabchi. Akbar, on reading a passage, exclaimed that this could never be the writing of Jauhar, who lacked literacy and could not have written in such a manner. Before 1590s, Akbar would never read. But here, what Faizi Sarhindi is telling us is that the manuscript was taken by Akbar himself, and he read out a passage when Naqib Khan was also standing, and read out the passage and said, ये हो ही नहीं सकता, ये जौहर आफ्ताबची ऐसा लिख ही नहीं सकता है. It is not his writing. He never writes in this manner. Faizi Sarhindi then explained that yes, that was the case. And he had in fact carried out the necessary corrections and edited the text. Luckily, Faizi says that Khane Khanan, who had just arrived, authenticated the fact, and the emperor then offered Faizi Sarhindi to join the translation bureau and translate some works of Hindi to Persian. Here, in this whole episode, which has been narrated by Faizi Sarhindi, Akbar reads, Akbar understands, and Akbar points out an error to Faizi Sarhindi कि ये तो जो ऑथर जिसके बारे में आप कह रहे हैं वो लिख ही नहीं सकता है, उसकी राइटिंग ही नहीं, ना उसका अंदाज है ना उसकी राइटिंग है. और फिर फैजी सरंदी ये लिखते हैं कि फिर अब जौहर आफ्ताबची लिखता है कि फैजी सरंदी ने एक्सेप्ट किया इस चीज को कि नहीं सर, ये उसका लिखा हुआ नहीं है, ये बल्कि मैंने उसको करेक्ट करके दिया था. अकबर तब भी डाउटफुल थे, एंड देन खाने खानान who was present there, he told Akbar, no, I am a witness to the fact that Faizi Sarhindi had been translating this. And now Akbar did not say anything about plagiarism or anything. He just offered service to Faizi Sarhindi, and who joined the translation bureau. Here, this is a direct evidence कि अकबर पढ़ते भी थे, समझते भी थे. उनके लिए वो जो आपने तारे जमीन पर you have seen in the movie that words start rotating and in dyslexia one cannot read. Now in 1590 there is an evidence Akbar is reading, Akbar is understanding. This whole narration of Faizi Sarhindi explicitly demonstrated Akbar reading the text and being aware of the writing style of his courtiers as well. So in short, what I have to say here is that Akbar was in fact posing to be an Ummi, an illiterate. Why? Because he was trying to ape the Prophet of Islam. Abul Fazl was mentioning this because his whole attempt was to put before the public the divine kingship of Akbar. Just like the Prophet of Islam, he was an Ummi. But the moment Akbar realized कि अब इस्लाम से, मजहब से, religion से कोई लेना देना नहीं है, there is a policy of Sulekul where everyone has to be given equal treatment. Montserrat claiming that in fact he is negating all the religions. Now Akbar comes out openly. Now there is no pretension. He can read, and there are evidence that in his chamber Akbar was reading a text and interpreting the text. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a detailed talk about such an interesting topic. I'm sure there would be many questions because you've put forward certain important arguments about a topic that has been intriguing the historians for a long time. So I'll start with the questions that are there. There are a number of them. There are certain questions, certain comments. So there is this one that has been shown on your screen that is by Zoya Zedi. She asks, greatest of thinkers are known to be unlettered. Don't you think that Akbar was probably one of them?
That is what I have tried to argue,
I think yes,
that
yes,
this was the pretension of Akbar. And just
yeah.
like some of the great men do not actually want to admit that they have been taught by others who are lesser than them. And they always try to pretend that they have been taught by God Himself, or they know everything themselves. They have such a personality, and that is what I have tried to demonstrate today, basing on what Ellen Smart and others had written. My particular opinion is that though if you hurriedly read what Ellen Smart had written, but actually if you go deep into the history of Akbar's period, you would realize that Akbar was not Amir Khan. He had no dyslexia as such, possibly, and this was all pretension cooked up to forward his particular divine theory of kingship.
Exactly. There is another question that has been put up to you by Zahid Hamid, and he asks if he had acquired knowledge of history by Abul Fazl, and on what basis we can conclude that Akbar was illiterate.
No, I don't think that he acquired knowledge of history from Abul Fazl at all. In fact, as far we are very sure to know that even as far as Akbarnama is concerned, it was compiled by Abul Fazl on a large number of other histories which had been ordered to be compiled for the purpose of Abul Fazl writing an official history. Apart from that, there is another history which is much more comprehensive than the Akbarnama of Abul Fazl, and that is that Tarikh Alfi, which actually is very voluminous. And unfortunately, the whole Tarikh Alfi is not available to us in India, although it has been published in Iran. But there were a large number of writers, Bayazid Bayat, Gulbatan Banu Begum, Jawhar Aftabchi, so on and so forth. Then for the writing of Akbarnama, Akbar opened the doors of the his own archives, from where he could take the material and the all the documents on which he would base the history. So I don't think that probably I mean I will go to an extent to say that both Abul Fazl and Akbar were learning together about the past which was happening. We also know the fact that there are a number of recensions which are available for Akbarnama. Possibly whenever Akbar would write anything, and that is true for almost all the writings of that period, they would first be read back to the emperor, and he would make necessary changes. So just to claim that it is Abul Fazl who is, putting words into the mouth of the emperor is actually not correct. Sometimes it is vice versa. It is the emperor who is putting words into the mouth of the authors. Who came first, the egg or the hen? I don't know. But still,
Yes.
I would say that both Abul Fazl and Akbar were at one particular level. Both of them were scholars, both of them were intellectuals, and were trying to learn from the past.
Exactly. With Abul Fazl and Akbar, it's not really sure. Historians are always debating who influenced whom, and that's a very interesting debate. And sir, as you mentioned, archives that Akbar collected. So it is a question related to that. Um, Mirza Hasnan asks, Emperor Akbar had 24,000 books in his library. Where has this library gone? Do we know something about this library? Does archaeological work have been done to discover it? Do we have any manuscripts surviving from this library? So he wants to know about the archives that you mentioned.
Mirza Hassan Sahab, I would recommend that once this COVID scare is over, do visit Europe. Go to Victoria Albert Museum, go to British Library, go to a large number of other collections, go to Smithsonian, go to Paris. Uh, in fact, a large number of works which were once part of the Mughal library, the imperial library, were smuggled out of this country. Uh, a number of works which are there even in the Indian collections, for example, Raza Library, Rampur, at Khuda Bakhsh Library in Patna, and mm, certain other, for example, I know for sure that even at a place like the Mahmudabad Library, they very proudly show us that this is a manuscript which once belonged to Akbar, or for that matter, this belongs to Shah Jahan. During the period after the Ghadar, after 1857, even before that, there were a number of lootings, but especially after 1857, most of these, libraries were looted. Some of them fortunately landed up in the foreign archives and collections. I say fortunately because at least there they have survived. Some of those works are now in private collections, and yes, a large number of them have also disappeared. Maybe some of them are still in private collections, which we are not being informed about, but we do know that a sizable number of the Mughal archives does survive. Secondly, I would say that as far as the physical remains of the library are concerned, yes, we do have evidence regarding some of them, not all of it. We know that a part of the library was also at Fatehpur Sikri, and till date, there is a room at least which through memory is known as the Library of Akbar. Whether it was a library or not, but memory of the library survived even also amongst the villagers of Fatehpur Sikri who gave such names. Presumably, there did exist these places. In fact, most of the collections of these, for example, at Amer, they have the library collections, Amer archives. Much of the material is derived from the Mughals, apart from their own. So yes, much of it survives. Some of it has also been destroyed.
Yes, and regarding that library structure at Fatehpur Sikri, most of the guides also identified as library. Guides who do not identify any structure correctly, but they also, in popular memory, that is, there is a library that is associated with Akbar and that attests to his scholarly background and his greatness as a scholar. There are some comments that are there, and there are certain other questions. I would just read out some of the questions which are in nature of a comment, more like a comment than a question. Dr. Zoya Zadi again asserts, how can a person who was such a patron of arts, poetry, culture, and such a great thinker, who even tried to introduce a religion, Deen Ilahi, be illiterate? So I think that is what you
Well,
have tried.
that's a comment, but I'll just answer to Dr. Zoya Zedi. I mean, thank you, Zoya Appa, for taking so much interest in our programs. You are there almost on both the days of the week. Thank you for giving us this opportunity, because we feel encouraged when non-historians join. Uh, your question is very relevant, but let me also say that there was no religion which was circulated by Akbar. There was Deen-e-Ilahi or Keshe Muhammadi or whatever you call it, was not actually a deen. As I tried to point out during the course of the lecture, that some of the contemporaries, for example, Montserrat, Father Montserrat, a Jesuit priest who was in Akbar's court, he thought that Akbar was in fact negating all the religions. It would be, I think, a good idea if we can have a lecture on religion, but I will recommend Dr. Zaidi that on my personal YouTube page, I have uploaded a lecture on the religions of the medieval kings, starting from Sultanate, coming down to Aurangzeb. So, if ever you find time, I have started from Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna. I ended with Aurangzeb. Their religion, their attitude towards religion, their policies, what they did. So possibly, as far as Akbar is concerned, he never patronized any religion. In fact, he negated all the religions, and Deen-e-Ilahi was just like a silsila, say the Tishtiya silsila or the Nanak Panthi silsila. He was very interested to have a silsila in his name, and that was all. Nothing more than that.
Thank you, sir, for such detailed response.
And yes, Rana is quite right. That is what I tried to say, that just like the Prophet, he Akbar. We when we write the textbooks or read the textbooks, we only find the mention of Sultan Balban, who is said to have, in his theory of kingship, taken up the position next to God, or in fact next to the Prophet, removing the Khalifa and everything. Similar was the case with Akbar, but he was more intelligent. He did not do it in a very direct manner. But throughout, if you read Abul Fazl, now fortunately, Akbar Nama is, present in translation, in quite a few translations, good translations. Beveridge translation is there, but apart from the Beveridge translation, we have the translation which has been done by the Murthy Library, by that American scholar who has been translating Mughal sources for us. It's a beautiful translation. In fact, the Murthy Library is coming out with editions. On one page, you have the Persian text. On the page which is just the opposite, you have the English translation. So from this, it is very clear that, Akbar, or for that matter, all these emperors, Humayun as well, were trying to position themselves as divine kings. Humayun going to the extent of being a little man, covering his face with a black or a parda, and revealing his face, Ru Numai, when he would come before the public, and acting as if he is the divine king, a god incarnate. Akbar did not go to that extent, but throughout the writings of Abul Fazl, even as I pointed out that there's no time for us to go into those details, but even on the walls of the Fatehpur Sikri, the same concept has been drawn. Some other time we would discuss that.
Yes, but we also know that even Akbar used to blow into water and give it to people as a cure, as medicine. So
yes.
there have been these things about Mughal emperors. There are a number of compliments that the lecture has received. Rana Safavi has thanked you for the illuminating lecture. Dr. Zoya Zaidi has
Akbar
also.
is a very illuminating personality, so whoever tries to speak on Akbar is illuminated also. It is his divine grace, Akbar.
Dr. Zoyazadi says that it is not only a lecture but a probe into what is the difference between being a scholar and a literate, which is something that is really important that has been uh, put forward in this lecture. There is one question related to the present times, related to the modern history that we know. That one is by Gaurav Mathur. Gaurav Mathur asks, how much did Akbar influence Pandit Nehru in endorsing Indian constitution to be secular in its spirit?
Thank you for this question, Gaurav. Uh, uh, I think if you read Nehru's writings, especially Discovery of India or the letters which he wrote to his daughter, it appears that Nehru, uh, just like Gandhi, derived a lot from our past. It is not only Akbar from whom he derived inspiration, but also from Gautam Buddha. I mean, both these persons, for example, the Ashoka Dhamma of Gautam Buddha, that had a heavy influence on what actually happened in our constitution. And secondly, the Sulhekul of Akbar. In fact, I may be wrong. I'm not a political scientist, but we are very proud to say that when we Indians use the term secular, it is very different from what the Europeans mean by the term secular. In Europe, the term secular means distancing oneself from any religious activity, distancing oneself from God, being irreligious. I mean, if you use the term secular outside India, it means being irreligious. But here, in Nehru's India, I mean, the concept which we drew is actually the same as was made by Akbar when he propounded his theory of Sulhekul, peace with all, absolute peace. uh, Distancing, equidistancing from all, appreciation of all, conjoining the good points of all. So here, in for Nehru, Nehru may not himself go to a temple, but if someone else from his government, the President of India, is going to inaugurate a temple which is being rebuilt, he mildly expresses his doubts but does not censor him. Because to Nehru, the term secular is the same as the term would have been sounded to Akbar. And that is equidistance. And that is what is needed in India today. Till that definition prevailed in this country, we were leading a better life. Since the moment we have forgotten the ideals of Sulhekul of Akbar, unfortunately, we are in for a trouble. I wish for the day when once again the ideals of Sulhekul are followed by the government of India. Any other question?
There are certain comments that are there. Nasima Faridi thanks you for the new and fascinating facts, and thanks Ganga Jamni for putting up these lectures. There are certain comments that are there. I'll just read out one of them for you. There is one by Akhlaq Ahan, who again says that it was a wonderful talk. And he puts up a comment and he says he used to have Naqib Khan for reading books. Is there any evidence that he abandoned seeking service post 1590? He also adds, I have come across some good poetry by him.
Uh, uh, Thank you, Professor Akhlaq Khan Sahab. Uh, I hope that after this lecture, if you have my email or WhatsApp, you would share that good poetry with me. I have been hunting for such thing. As an answer to your question, I would just say that even Jahangir did not abandon this, reading of books to him. What to talk about Akbar? Yes, not only Naqib Khan, there were a number of others who were reading out manuscripts and texts. There was a certain time in the Ghusl Khana which was assigned for reading out this material, these books to him or to all the emperors. This tradition continued. We have no evidence, but the evidence which I have put before you is the fact that in that particular passage, it is not Naqib Khan who is reading to Akbar, but it is Akbar who is reading back the text to those who are standing before him. So we know that from 1590 onwards, or from the period that Akbar came up with the idea of Sulekul, possibly all pretensions were abandoned. But the tradition of reading out book was an imperial tradition which was there almost throughout Central Asia. It was there even earlier. It was there even afterwards. So there was nothing special as far as Akbar was concerned. People do point out that Akbar ko पढ़ा जाता था, or as if it was not being read out to Jahangir. Unfortunately, I am a very lazy man. My supervisor once had given me the chance and opportunity of writing on this theme, not confining myself to only Akbar, but to also take into consideration Jahangir and Shah Jahan. I did start some work. I did start collecting some material, and what surprised me was the fact that reading evidences of reading these works prevailed to a very large extent under Jahangir and Shah Jahan as well. I'm not very sure about Aurangzeb. I have not read it myself. I have just read statements that even to him during his period, this practice was continuing. So to answer you, that probably after 1590, the pretension of not reading by Akbar was gone, but there were readers who would read out, which was established tradition under the Timurids.
Um, Dr. Zoya Zadi again asks a very interesting question, and she says, Akbar in his atelier had miniatures which were of size 1 by 1 yard and arranged in serial order and stitched together, which he used to watch. This can be called first examples of earliest films. Anything known about these manuscripts? Do we have any information?
One of the first manuscripts to be illustrated was in the form of wall hangings. I'm forgetting the name. वो कौन सा टेक्स्ट है लुबना जिसमें इन्होंने दास्तान अमीर हमजा in fact were not for the book, they were wall hangings. I don't know whether it was used for that or not, but I also have evidence which has been noted by Professor S.P. Verma. S.P. Verma is one of those historians who have worked on the history of Mughal paintings, and he has compiled a dictionary of Mughal painters where he has given recorded all the known paintings of various artists of the Mughal court. There he gives very brief accounts of whatever information is found on each of these painters. It is during the period of Akbar, or it is yes, probably Akbar, where he discusses that there is a portrait which is given of Iranian king, which had been made by an Indian painter. And when one of the Iranian ambassadors was visiting the court, Akbar asked that particular painting to be brought and asked this ambassador, is it true? Is your emperor like this? And the ambassador suggested certain changes कि नहीं यहाँ मोटा नहीं है नाक ऐसी है पला ऐसा है and those necessary changes were made. During the reign of Jahangir, we know for a fact, I wish that a day would come when we would be able to find them once again. Orders were issued by Jahangir to make the portraits of each and every noble of the court. So it was a sort of a catalogue of all the nobles. So portraits were drawn of all the nobles. So possibly they were not only drawn but catalogued and kept together somewhere. Unfortunately, we just have no information where that all collection went. On the walls of one of the buildings at Fatehpur Sikri, that place is now known as Abdar Khana. It has been identified earlier by Smith as, madrasa for the girls. Later on, Athar Abbas Rizvi identified as the water house, the Abdar Khana. I also identified it as a place where food was kept before being distributed in the palace. Now, in one of the rooms, on the top room of that, there are beautiful dados on the walls, and on the dados, traces of the full portraits of nobles still remain. The actual paintings are gone, but traces of the portraits are there. So possibly portraits of the nobles were made not only by Jahangir but also during the reign of Akbar. Whether these were being, and you know that Lubna, you have also written and you have also presented a paper on that, and I have a chapter in my book on Fatehpur Sikri where full scenes have been depicted on the walls, whole narrations, whole stories on the walls of Fatehpur Sikri.
The stories of two fighting elephants that are there on that structure, Sunehra Makan it is called.
Temple scene is there, not the temple scene that you have, a scene where there is a double-storied house, people all around, with one person, patang bazi, boats in the
There's
river.
A complete market that is depicted, yes.
A full market. Now, whether these were to be seen by the imperial authority, because I'm very sure that in these palaces, the laity were not allowed to come in. Even very, very selective nobles would have been allowed to come in. So who were watching these? Possibly what was suggested, that these were being used as entertainment for the emperor himself, or for the harem, or as an aura of his for the select few who would come in. So naturally, this whole genre of paintings was also being used as a symbol of sovereign authority.
Thank you, sir, for that interesting, detailed response. This is something that people generally do not know about Mughals, because surface decoration and paintings are relatively less worked upon topics when we come to Mughal history. There is another question, and that is from TCA Raghavan. He thanks you for the talk, and he says that he missed the explanation about Jahangir's references to Akbar being unlettered. What is the reason for that?
Raghavan ji, thank you once again for joining. We are actually hoping that that day would soon arrive when you would be talking and we would be listening. But I think there's still some time left for that. Raghavan ji, the thing is, which I tried to talk today, is that it is Akbar himself, Abul Fazl, and Jahangir, all three of them try to stress the fact that Akbar is illiterate. Both Abul Fazl in his Akbarnama as well as Jahangir in his Tuzuk refer to Akbar as a very knowledgeable person but as illiterate. In fact, I read out a passage where Jahangir says that no one can make out that Akbar is Ummi. Uh, my argument for this is that, and he is very explicit when he says, I mean, he uses the term, and I marked out when I read out that particular passage, that my father could not read or write, very explicitly. Uh, Possibly, what I tried to argue is that this whole pretension of being an ummi, just like the Prophet of Islam. I mean, you go and ask any Muslim, and he would tell us with pride that Rasulullah to ummi the. It is only in the Shia tradition that they point out that when the Sulh Hudaybiyah took place and the pagans insisted that in the treaty which is being signed, instead of Muhammad Rasulullah, it should be Muhammad ibn Abdullah, which should be written. And the treaty would not be signed until this word Muhammad Rasulullah is removed. And Ali was supposed to be the scribe and he was writing it. The narration goes that, Ali just refused. He said, had I believed that Muhammad is only the son of his father and not the Prophet of Islam, I would not be performing this duty. I cannot do it. So the narration goes, and which is a very authentic hadith, that the Prophet took up his pen and struck off what was written. So if you ask the Shias, if the Prophet did not know how to read and write, how did he identify what portion to cut and what not to cut? And the reply which we get is the same as the reply which is being given by Abul Fazl and Jahangir, that my father or the Prophet was not lettered by anyone from this world. He, being divinely inspired, knew how to do it. So possibly this was the posturing, and even by Jahangir, just to show the divine origin of his kingship, just to show how divinely ordained his father was, and that is why he stresses on it. Although, as I pointed out at the end of my lecture, that there are evidences that he could read. I tried to read out from Arif Kandari the verses which were composed, but you can say that even an unlettered man can compose, verses, and they are not very good verses. But the last evidence which I gave is very exclusive, that Akbar could read, and possibly Jahangir was just attributing something which was not a fact.
Thank you, sir, for summing that up. There is one comment, one question by Erimtan Khan. He asks, did Akbar entertain relations with his Muslim contemporaries in the West? I mean, the Ottomans in Istanbul. We know that Akbar interacted with, sent an embassy to Spain, but yes.
Whatever evidence we have is that there were letters which were written by Abdullah Khan Uzbek, which had references to the Ottomans. At a time when Abdullah Khan was Uzbek was under pressure, and there was a chance that he might not succeed against the Ottoman onslaught. Abdullah Khan Uzbek wanted to enhance his sovereignty over the regions of Persia, to hold it. The Ottomans were also eyeing certain regions of the Safavid Empire. It was at that time that letters was exchanged between the Uzbeks and the Mughals. But unfortunately, we don't have any evidence of any direct contact between Mughals and That has been one of the banes of the Indians. We have always considered ourselves to be insulated from the world. Al-Biruni writes that the Indians believe that there's no one but them. By Akbar's time, at least under the Mughals, no such feeling existed. There was knowledge of the Europe, there was knowledge of the West, there was a knowledge of the East. They did know that there were other empires which are there. To certain empires, there were certain attempts which were made to come into contact with. We know, for example, that there were certain kingships to whom Akbar, in fact, had written letters. Uh, but even to Abdullah Khan Uzbek, till the moment the Uzbeks did not come to share a common boundary with the Mughal Empire, Akbar did not entertain or reply to any of the letters which were written by the Uzbeks themselves. What to talk about Ottomans? But they were aware of the Ottoman influence, in as far as the seafaring was concerned. At a time when we know that Gulbadan Banu Begum and the women of the harem, the merchants, the nobles, they were all running their ships towards Mecca, and they were coming into contact not only with the Portuguese but also with the Ottoman fleets. They were very aware of them. They were also wary of them, but neither the Ottomans made any direct attempt towards the Mughal Empire, nor possibly any of the Mughals made any attempt to have contact with the Ottomans. Maybe at some point of time we may get some new information, but this is what I have at the moment. No contact with Istanbul, although the Mughals were aware that they are mighty kings. The Mughals never tried to take up the Khilafat of the Sunni world because the Khalifas were, after all, the Ottoman rulers. So no attempt on that level was made by the Mughals themselves.
Thank you, sir, for giving a detailed response and for telling us about the relations of Akbar with the Islamic empires of the West. There are a lot of comments. There are a lot of gratitude. There's a lot of gratitude that is there. People are thanking you for the lecture, and there is one interesting question. I think that would be the last question that we take today because the time is running out. There is a question by Ashok Mathur. He asks, could you please tell us about Akbar's relations with the Vaishnavites in the Braj region, particularly with Mahaprabhu Vallabhacharya's sect? If any information, he did seek
Ragna,
Krishna's
can you,
philosophy.
sorry, I missed it. Can you just put it there so that I may read it also? It's a long question. Can you put it on the screen?
Yes, I can't figure that out. I'll just read it out again. So
Ah,
Ashok Mathur asks, could you please tell us about Akbar's relations with Vaishnavites in the Braj region, particularly with Mahaprabhu Vallabhacharya's sect? If any information, he did seek Krishna's philosophy.
uh, I think it's a very good question which you have put up, uh, Ashok Mathur. Ashok ji, I mean, thank you for this beautiful question which you have put up. As you know that we started our lecture series with two lectures on Braj Bhum itself, uh, dealing with Mughal relations with the Vaishnava sect. Um, uh, I mean, in fact, I would recommend. I'm no expert of this field, So probably I may not be able to satisfy you as far as the import of your question is concerned. I can only guide you where you can find the answer, and that is in the works of a scholar like J.S. Grewal. Now, J.S. Grewal has edited a work on the religions during the medieval period. It's a very voluminous work which has come out. There, Grewal has tried to deal with some of the questions and tried to answer what type of relations Akbar had with other sects. Apart from that, there is also a sizable number of articles which have been written by Professor Irfan Habib himself, where he tries to deal with Akbar's relations with the various, indigenous philosophies. Um, mm, you know, uh, Akbar did not only come into contact with the Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sect, but he had relations with a large number of other religious groups as well. We know that, for example, Devi Chand, possibly you would be aware about the fact that once Akbar invited Devi Chand to a discussion with him. Devi Chand was quite old and he could not climb up to the place which is known as the Ibadat Khana. So what was done is that Devi Chand was made to sit at a charpoy, and that charpoy was lifted up to the window, jharoka, which abuts the Ibadat Khana structure at Fatehpur Sikri, the structure which I have ultimately identified as the Ibadat Khana. And we are informed by contemporaries that the whole night the discussions kept on taking place. We also have a large number of texts written by the Vaishnavas themselves. Chaurasi Vaishnava ki Varta, for example, where there a large number of legends have been reproduced, which try to show that Akbar did have relations. Some he attempted to have relations with all type of saints and Vaishnava figures, but the Vaishnava saints themselves spurned the offers. I mean, in the Chaurasi Vaishnava ki Varta, there are verse after verse which says अकबर ने हमें बुलाया था, हमने मना कर दिया, नहीं गए, और फिर अकबर हमारे पास आए और उनसे बात हुई. So we don't know whether Akbar went to them. We heard Shivas Goswami tell us on the basis of the documents, the documents which he has, that Akbar never visited. Jahangir visited. We also have the paintings of Jahangir where he is meeting other saints, going to them and not calling them to his court. So there were many type of relations with all type of people. So possibly this is one of the aspects. Krishna, after all, was supposed to be one of the prophets of Islam, and that is what Dara was also talking about. There was, many Mughals who
Exactly.
would believe that he is one of the prophets of Islam himself. So there were relations, but I am not the best person to answer you this question.
Exactly. Every question here is a potential discussion, a potential lecture on its own. And if we go on like this, the discussions, the questions, the answers, the arguments can go on forever, but we'll have more lectures, we'll have more
Libna,
interactions.
just a moment, Libna.
We are going to.
Just a moment, Libna. There is a comment by Raghavan Saab. It's a very interesting comment, and that is why I'll just pick it up. The way I answered him, so he says, thank you for that. But he adds, you would not agree this could be because of the numerous frictions between Jahangir and his father. No, sir. I would not believe that. That friction was very temporary, and the type of relations which existed between the father and son, Possibly, I mean, Jahangir takes care never to criticize his father throughout his Tuzuk. So even if there was some pain in his heart about those bad days when he had revolted against his father, maybe it was there, but throughout his Tuzuk, there's no iota of even an inkling that he had differences with his father. So I don't believe that he's because of the friction with his father, he's calling him as Ummi. As I said, that Ummi has turned into a very sacred term. It simply doesn't mean illiterate. There are other words which could have been used. The choice of the word Ummi itself points out that it is trying to relate it with the prophet who was also considered to be Ummi. So this is not something which is in rancor, but this is something which is in praise which Jahangir is putting up for his father.
There are paintings which show Jahangir as looking up to his father. He got his portrait of his father made along with him. So there was after he became the emperor, Jahangir tried to sort of emulate his father, that is Akbar.
Meru
So
Jafar,
thank you, sir. Uh,
just a moment. I know you are quite tired, but just last comment and then I'll stop. Meru Jafar has asked, what was the political reason, if any, to insist that Akbar was illiterate? It was not, it was a very good reason. Throughout the medieval period, there were attempts being made to relate the kingship with divine authority. From the very beginning, as I said, from Sultan Balban onwards, there were attempts to position the emperor. I gave you the example of Humayun. Humayun also tried to position himself as a divine king. Akbar also, in fact, his whole court, which he elaborated upon, although it is in astrological, astronomical terms, but actually he's alluding it to the divine authority. Okay, everyone has a place of his own, and in the center, just the divine king should rule, just like the sun over the stars. Possibly, Meru Jafar, the answer to your question is that the reason behind such posturing, the insistence that Akbar was illiterate, was very simple, to position himself next to the Prophet. अल्लाह है, अल्लाह का रसूल है, और उसी के फॉलोइंग में कोई खलीफा वगैरह नहीं है. वो सल्तनत पीरियड में खुलफा के नायब हुआ करते थे, सुल्तान हुआ करते थे. यहाँ बादशाह है. देयर इज a Quranic verse which was invoked by almost all these rulers. Atiullah, Atiu Rasul, wa ulil amri minkum. Obey God, obey the Prophet, and those in authority. And Mughals thought that they are the authority. So obey God, the Prophet, and soon after the Prophet, no question of a Khalifa, it is we who are. So Ottomans may be the Khalifa of a section of the Muslims, Safavids may be the representatives of the Imams, but we, the Mughals, are the authority from God. And I'm sorry, I'm taking time, but probably I may not get a chance after this. Aurangzeb, the nishan which Aurangzeb sends to Rana Raj Singh at a time when he is trying to take up the kingship. He's in war with his brothers. It is at that time that he solicits the help of the Rajput rulers, and he writes a letter to Rana Raj Singh, and there he invokes the same concept. He says, who are the kings? Kings are nothing but the pillars of the court of Allah. And if the emperor is weak, the whole court of Allah would collapse. And just as Allah is for everyone, the Hindu, the Muslim, the Christian, and so on and so forth, so is the king. If he discriminates between any of them, he is going against the divine order. If king is the Zillallah, the people are Khalqullah. So this whole concept is not only of Akbar, not only of Balban, but it continues to quite. Aurangzeb never practiced on that when he became the king. That's another matter. But in theory, he invoked the same concepts as were being invoked by the policy of Solekul of Akbar, and that was that it was the divinely ordained king.
Thank you so much, sir. There would be many more lectures on the questions that have been put up. There would be many more discussions, hopefully. We will end this lecture on this note. We wish everybody a very happy new year, good week ahead. We hope to see you next Thursday with our lectures. Thank you so much, sir, for giving so much time, for giving such detailed attention on every aspect. I thank the audience for putting up such amazing question, and we hope to see you next Thursday. Thank you.
Just a moment before we end and we say the final goodbyes. The tradition is that we inform you about the next program which we are going to have. And my next program, which we would be taking up, is in the new year with this lecture. Unfortunate lecture, because all of us were expecting a glamour here with uh, Dr. Catherine Schofield before you in talking about novels, music, and films showing from Mughal-e-Azam. Unfortunately, that could not happen. But then this is the end of our programs of the year